My dad was a state trooper, the kind of guy who ate his steak well done and thought that life's problems were best handled with a few threats and a firm hand. When I was a kid, I idolized him, but by the time I hit 16, everything about him rubbed me the wrong way. His rules, his demands, the way he acted like the world should kneel before his uniform. I couldn't stand it. I was always butting heads with him, always getting grounded, always thinking about what life might look like beyond the fence of our yard. It didn't help that when Hank, I'd started calling him Hank by then, got his promotion, we had to pack up and move to this dusty, middle-of-nowhere town in rural Texas. One of those places you drive through without even knowing you had, flatlands stretching for miles, the highway blurring into a mirage. Hank called it an opportunity, said it would be good for the family, but I knew it was about fixing his reputation. Some scandal back in our old town had everyone whispering about him, and moving was his chance to start over. Our new place was a rickety old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, wooden floors that creaked like they were crying out for help, a barn that looked like it could fall over in a stiff wind. It wasn't a home, not to me. Hank tried to sell it as some kind of adventure, but all I saw was more isolation, more chances for him to tighten his grip. My mom just went along with it, like always. She was quiet, dutiful, the kind of woman who made dinner at 6 sharp and avoided eye contact when Hank was in one of his moods. The barn was weird, though. Hank would lock it up every night, checking the padlock 3 times before he came in. I'd watch him from the kitchen window, a mug of lukewarm coffee in my hands, and wonder what he thought he was protecting in there. Cows? Chickens? Ghosts of better days? I didn't know, but it was clear he was obsessed with whatever he kept inside. One night he came home late from his shift. He looked different, eyes wide, sweat glistening on his forehead even though it wasn't that hot out. He went straight to the barn, unlocked it, stepped inside for a few minutes, then locked it again. When he came into the house, he looked at us and said, "Don't ask me about work. Don't ask anything." That was Hank, always keeping his secrets, always making sure we knew our place. But I couldn't just let it go. Curiosity got the best of me, like it always did. So one afternoon, while Hank was off doing whatever it is state troopers do, I broke into the barn, used a spare key I'd lifted from his desk. Inside, there wasn't much. Old tools, some bales of hay, except for one thing that stood out. An unmarked car, windows blacked out. It looked old, like something from the 60s, covered in dust except for where Hank's hands had obviously wiped the door handles clean. I remember just standing there, staring, wondering why in the world my dad, a man who didn't have a sentimental bone in his body, would keep a relic like that. The next few weeks, Hank kept coming home late. I'd hear the police scanner squawking in his patrol car when he pulled up, and every time, he'd look shaken, like he'd seen something that wasn't meant for him. I finally decided to ask old Mr. Thompson, the neighbor down the road, about it. He was the kind of old guy who knew everything that happened in the town and wasn't shy about sharing it. Mr. Thompson leaned in close when I asked about the car chases Hank had been involved in. He lowered his voice and said, "You stay off the roads at night, you hear? There's ghost cars out there, looking for someone. It's been happening for decades. Cars with no drivers, chasing down anyone unlucky enough to get in their way." He patted my shoulder and shuffled off before I could ask anything more. I knew I wasn't going to get anything from Hank if I asked him straight up. He'd just shut me down like always, make me regret even trying. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. One night, I hid in the backseat of Hank's car. I knew it was risky, but I had to see for myself what was going on. It was hours before anything happened. I lay there, cramped and uncomfortable, until I heard the crackle of the police radio. A high-speed chase, another one of those unmarked cars. Hank hit the gas, and I peeked over the edge of the seat just enough to see where we were headed. We ended up at this intersection. Nothing but flat land in every direction. Hank got out, but there was no car in sight. No one else around. He walked into the middle of the intersection and stood there talking to the empty air. Then he went to the trunk, pulled out a set of black keys, and just stood there holding them like he was waiting for someone to take them from him. I didn't move. I barely breathed. He looked right at the car, like he could see me, but his eyes were blank, like he was looking through me. When he finally got back in the car, he drove home in silence. The whole way, I stayed hidden, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The next day, I confronted him. I couldn't take it anymore. I accused him of lying, of hiding something dangerous. Hank snapped. He grabbed my arm, hard enough to leave bruises, and told me, "You don't know what you're talking about. You stay out of this. You stay out of my business." I didn't listen. I waited until he was on another late shift, then went back to the barn. The black car was gone, and in its place, a set of burned tires lay in a pile, smoldering like they'd just been set alight. The smell of burnt rubber filled the place, and I could feel my stomach twist at the sight of it. I needed answers, so I waited. The next week, I saw it with my own eyes. One of the ghost cars, a rusted old thing, moving faster than anything should, with no driver, no headlights, just barreling down the road like it had a purpose, like it was searching for something. That night, Hank finally broke. He told me about a military experiment gone wrong, something from decades ago. The cars weren't cars anymore, not really. They were something else, remnants of whatever the government had tried to do out here. And the local police? They were supposed to keep it quiet, keep it contained. I didn't know what to do with that information. I still don't. Hank left his job soon after that. Said he couldn't keep doing it, couldn't keep lying. I don't blame him, but I can't stay. Not after everything I've seen. I don't trust him. I don't trust anyone. I packed a bag last night. I'm leaving this place. I don't know where I'm going, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never driving those highways at night again. Story 2. I've been at that gas station for almost a year now, standing behind the counter, selling smokes, cheap beer, and the occasional pack of gum to the few souls who drive down this long, lonely stretch of Pennsylvania highway. Most of my nights are quiet. Just me. The sound of the pumps clicking off now and then, and the crackle of the police scanner I keep under the counter. I picked up the habit from Jacob, my older brother, who's back living with us again. Mom said it'd be good for him. Save some money, she said. But him moving back has been tense. Jacob's been different since he lost the house. The divorce messed him up, and now that he's back, he's got that deputy badge on him and an attitude like he owns the world. He's always telling me what to do, talking about making something of myself. I don't think he understands that I am making something. I'm helping Mom. Besides, there's not much out there for someone like me. I'm not like the rest of the kids I went to high school with. They all took off to college, left town, and never looked back. Me, I stayed. Not because I didn't have ambition, but because someone had to. And honestly, I like the nights. The quiet of it all. It's peaceful. The gas station's at the edge of the woods, just a few dim lights keeping the dark at bay. My shift ends around midnight, and I spend the quiet hours after that sitting on the porch, watching stars, sipping cold coffee, and listening to the police scanner. It's how I pass the time, really. A routine. One night, Jacob had me come along for a ride-along. Just a routine patrol, he said. He had me listen to the scanner while he drove. Halfway through our shift, there was a call. A black sedan, evading officers, heading down a route that wasn't too far from us. Jacob cursed under his breath and turned the wheel sharply, the tires skidding a little on the gravel road. We found the sedan parked out in an empty field. No driver, no sign of anyone around. Engine still running, door hanging wide open. Jacob dismissed it. Just another stolen car, he said. But I saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes, a tightness in his voice, unease. After that night, I started paying more attention to the scanner. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something else. But I started taking notes, documenting the chases that ended like that one. In empty fields, on deserted roads with no driver to be found. Over the next month, I heard the same report come through a few more times. Black sedans, engines running, radios emitting nothing but static. Always abandoned, always in some forgotten corner of the woods. It got under my skin, like a splinter you can't quite pull out. One evening, after another one of those calls, I asked old Bill, one of my coworkers, if he'd heard anything about it. He's been around since forever, knows more about this town than anyone else. Bill gave me this long look, then told me about a case from the 60s, same kind of thing. Cars showing up abandoned, people disappearing along the highway. He said folks used to call it the circle, but didn't elaborate. Just gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Some things are better left alone, kid." Jacob wasn't thrilled when I brought it up. He snapped, told me to stop digging around in things I didn't understand. But it only made me more determined. I started mapping out the locations of the abandoned cars, marking them on an old map I found in the attic. They formed a rough shape, almost a circle, like the stories Bill had mentioned. I knew I had to find out more. One night when Jacob was out, I snuck into his room. His desk was cluttered with papers, old reports, and a notebook that caught my eye. Inside, I found notes about the circle, cryptic messages about disappearances, symbols I didn't understand. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, the weight of it all settling in my chest. Before I could put it back, Jacob caught me. He was furious, grabbed the notebook from me, his face red, and told me in no uncertain terms to stay out of it. "You don't know what you're messing with," he said. "It's not safe." I wasn't going to let it go. I decided I'd check it out myself. I borrowed a pair of binoculars from the gas station's Lost and Found, packed a flashlight, and headed out to one of the spots on my map. It was a field, the same one where Jacob and I had found the black sedan that night. I parked on the side of the road and hiked through the tall grass, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. There were faint tire marks leading into the woods, but no footprints. It was like whoever had driven there had vanished into thin air. Another chase came over the scanner a week later. I made up my mind right then. I grabbed my keys, jumped in my car, and followed the sound of sirens. My heart pounded as I got closer, the scanner crackling with updates. The black sedan was there, parked on the roadside, just like before. But this time, I saw something. A figure stepping out, glowing faintly in the moonlight, before disappearing into the woods. My blood ran cold. I slammed my car into reverse, tires spinning as I sped away. Moments later, I saw Jacob's cruiser pull up in my rearview mirror. That night, I confronted Jacob. I demanded to know what was going on, what he knew about the circle. He looked tired, defeated. He finally told me the truth, how the town had been dealing with these incidents for decades. How the cars and the drivers weren't just missing. They were part of something bigger, something no one had been able to explain. He said the officers called it the circle because it always came back around, always repeated, and no one who got too close ever came out the same. Jacob resigned after that, said he couldn't handle it anymore, and I couldn't blame him. But for me, it was different. I couldn't let it go. I started digging deeper, trying to piece it all together. It became my obsession, the thing that kept me up at night, the thing that filled my thoughts as I worked my shifts at the gas station. Now, I sit here, the police scanner crackling beside me. Another chase is starting, another black sedan, another deserted road. I stare at my car keys, feeling the weight of the decision. I know what Jacob would say. I know what Mom would want. But there's something out there, something I need to understand. And maybe, just maybe, tonight is the night I find out. Story 3. They always said night shifts were quiet. At least that's what I believed when I signed up to be a cop in this sleepy Midwest town. I thought it'd be easier somehow. It was 1984, and I was new to the job, fresh off a career as a mechanic, figuring I'd be the one to help make things better, make it safer. Safer for my family, for Rachel and Lucy. That was the plan. But nothing about those nights ever felt quiet. Not after the chases started. It began during one of my first patrols. I was adjusting to the rhythm of the force, working the late hours when the streets were empty, save for a few headlights rolling back from the bars. The dispatcher called in a high-speed chase, a silver sedan, speeding through the back roads, weaving in and out of lanes like the driver knew every twist of the highway by heart. We set up a roadblock. The sedan pulled up, slow enough that it was almost eerie, like the driver knew they had nowhere to go. I stepped out, hand on my flashlight, ready for the usual spiel. But as I approached, there was no one inside. No driver, no passenger. Just an empty vehicle. And the engine? Cold. Not cooling off from a sprint, but cold like it hadn't moved in hours. "Must have bailed," one of the guys said, giving me a shrug like this kind of thing was normal. But the way he looked at the car, it wasn't normal. I knew it then. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself. Each time it was an older vehicle, beat-up sedans, one rusted pickup, even an old Buick. The same frantic chases, only for us to find them abandoned on the roadside, sometimes with shattered windows, other times looking like they'd sat through years of bad weather. And there was never a driver, not once. I started digging. I grew up in this town. I had deep roots here. I remembered stories people used to tell, stories you'd hear around bonfires or whispered over beer bottles. Phantom vehicles, they said. Cars that roamed the highway at night, driven by ghosts looking to settle scores. I never gave those stories much thought, but now I couldn't shake them. I brought it up with Mike, one of the older officers. He gave me this look, tired, worn, and maybe a bit scared, and told me, "Some things are better left alone, kid." Rachel, my wife, wasn't happy. I was hardly home as it was. Little Lucy barely knew what her dad looked like at this point. But when I told Rachel about the empty cars, her face went pale. "Just stop," she said. "Quit it. Come home. We need you here." I promised her I'd drop it, but promises don't mean much when you're haunted by headlights. One night, I took matters into my own hands. There'd been another chase, this one with a silver Buick that matched the description of a car from an old file. A car that had supposedly crashed in a fiery wreck years before. I went off duty, grabbed my files, and tried to connect the dots. That Buick was registered to a man who died in that very crash. And his car was now on the roads again, without a driver. A retired tow truck driver from down the way told me he'd seen something like this before, back in the 60s. Wrecked cars back on the streets. No driver. "They're looking for something," he told me. Voice a hushed whisper like someone might hear. Or someone. The next chase was different. I was on patrol, Lucy's picture tucked in the sun visor, Rachel's warnings echoing in my ears. The scanner crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice tight, urgent, another high-speed pursuit. And this time, the description was chilling. Silver sedan, a perfect match for my own car, down to the dent in the bumper. I took a deep breath and hit the gas. My heart pounded as I sped through the dark roads, cornfields flying by. And there it was, my car, my damn car, speeding ahead of me, taillights flickering like it knew I was chasing it. I cut it off at the next intersection, blocked its path. And when I got out, the driver's seat was empty, just like all the others. I left my patrol car there on the roadside. I walked home in the dark, the cornfields rustling beside me, the sky heavy with clouds. I couldn't bring myself to drive, couldn't bring myself to face whatever was behind the wheel of that ghost car. Rachel cried when I told her. She begged me to quit. I think she was right. I handed in my badge the next morning, and I haven't driven at night since. But sometimes, when the wind is just right and the moon is full, I swear I hear the hum of an engine outside. Not just any engine, mine. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, waiting.